Hello beautiful friends and fellow word lovers, welcome back to Pocket of Poetry. Today's video is going to be my May wrap up and I will just be talking to you guys about all the books I read in May. So numbers wise, May was a pretty low reading month for me, just because this was a super busy month. I moved this month and just a lot of life stuff was going on, so I was obviously a bit busy to get a lot of reading done. But I did manage to read a total of 6 books, 7 if you count this one, which I am going to be talking about in this video. I didn't actually read the entire book because it is a volume of collected poetry and it's quite large. So I skimmed through it and I read a good chunk of it, so I'm just going to count this as one of my reads for May. I'm definitely going to continue like perusing through this whenever I feel like it. But yeah, if you count this, 7 books in May. Well, most of the books that I read this month were Cassandra Clare books. If you guys watched my last wrap up, you know that I've been obsessed with Cassandra Clare and I've been reading The Mortal Instruments and the Infernal Devices series. So this month I actually finished both of those series, and so I feel quite accomplished. I wanted to get them finished this month because in June I'm planning to take a break from Cassandra Clare and probably from fantasy in general, not completely, but I will be taking a break from her books just because I've been reading that a lot lately and I want to read some more intellectual stuff, so yeah. But the first book that I read this month was Clockwork Prince by Cassandra Clare. This book is the second book in the Infernal Devices trilogy, and this is the first Cassandra Clare book that I gave 5 stars to. I loved this book so much. It was just perfection. It was everything that I wanted it to be. We're shuttled back into this Regency period England setting that's just super vivid and real, and then it's also sprinkled with all the magic and all the cool shadow hunter elements and, you know, all the downworld stuff, and you get this like mixture of Regency romance and fantasy adventure, and it's just perfect. Like, for me, it was the perfect blend of both of those elements, and I want more books like this. Like, if anyone has recommendations for fantasy that are also historical fiction, please leave them down below because I loved the Infernal Devices and I like want more. But yeah, Clockwork Prince, the first book in the series I read in April, Clockwork Angel, and that one I liked, but the second book just like amplified the experience of the whole series so much. Like, I feel like the writing improved so much in the second book, and just like the character development and the love triangle, you guys. The love triangle in this book is legendary. It is literally the best love triangle that I've ever read. People who've read this book and are fans of this book agree that this love triangle is like superb. The love triangle between Jem, Will, and Tessa, like, it's just beautiful. Like, the way that the story of the romances in this book was written, it's just so beautiful. And like, I found myself like wanting to cry. I found myself just like my heart hurt throughout the entire like second half of this book. It was just so, oh my gosh, just masterful. Just the way that she like develops these characters and makes you love them and makes you root for them, and just, yeah. I'm rambling, but Clockwork Prince was so good. You know, the adventure elements were there, the romance elements were there. It was just the perfect blend. Like, if you like historical fiction and you like fantasy, you have to read this series. Like, you can't not read this series. It's so good. And then I also read Clockwork Princess, which is the third and final book in the trilogy, in May, and I also gave that one 5 stars because it just exceeded my expectations as a conclusion of the series, as a conclusion of everything that happens with Jem, Will, and Tessa and all the other characters. I love them all, and I cried a lot. So I actually did. I cried a lot during Clockwork Princess. And then this is the book that I read. I can't remember if I read this before or after Clockwork Princess, but it was Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon. I loved this book, actually. I listened to the entire thing on audio, and the audiobook was super fun, and it was just like, I don't know, it was totally up my alley. Like, so basically, if you don't know the premise, Shadow of the Wind is about a young boy named Mikel living in Spain in the 1940s, I think just before World War II. And his father is a bookseller, and when he's 10 years old, his father takes him to this place called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is like this beautiful place that's full of all these old vintage volumes, and it kind of like is a sanctuary for these books. And when he's a kid, he's told he can pick one book out to keep, and that book will be like a special book to him throughout his life. And he picks out this book called Shadow of the Wind, and he reads it in like one night, and he absolutely loves the story. He falls in love, and he wants to find more books by the same author. But when he starts to look into it and like try and figure out what's going on with this author, his name is Julian Carax, he finds out that all of the books by this author have been burned and destroyed, and that someone is systematically going through and trying to destroy all of his books, and that his copy of The Shadow of the Wind is like super rare and super valuable because it's one of the last ones that exist. And so the book follows him as a young kid, and then kind of follows him up into his teenage years as the book kind of intertwines with his life, and the story of this author, Julian Carax, also intertwines with his life, and he starts to kind of look into the mystery of Julian Carax's life, and he starts to try and figure out what happened with him and why someone is trying to destroy his books. And so anyway, so the whole book is kind of like this mystery of him trying to figure all of this stuff out and piecing this puzzle together. And it's also set, like I said, in Spain, in Barcelona in the 1940s. It's set in bookshops and this gorgeous cemetery of forgotten books and this beautiful abandoned mansion. There's all these amazing settings in the book that just like are so atmospheric and just like make you want to be transported there. Like, I have probably never wanted to visit a place in a book more than I want to go to the cemetery of forgotten books. Like, I just think that would be so cool. But anyway, so this book was just, it was super magical. It had that like magical adventure sense to it, but it was also really funny. There were a lot of funny moments in the book. He has a friend named Fermin, who is like a really funny, like flamboyant sort of character who's really fun. And yeah, there was just a lot of adventure, some romance. Like, it was just kind of the perfect mix of everything in this book. I read this also for the late night book club. I don't think I mentioned that already, but I read it for that, even though I didn't finish it in time for the discussion. But I still was tuned in on the discussion later, and it was really good. And there were definitely like some elements in this book that were kind of problematic. Like, there was a lot of over sexualization of women, like to an extent where I was like, whoa. And a lot of people like didn't like that about the book. I wasn't crazy about it. There were just a few times in the storyline where it kind of dragged. It was very, very detailed, which I love. I love super detailed writing, and I love very lush descriptions, and this book definitely had that. There were some parts where I was like, whoa. But yeah, also another thing about this book, the villain in this book was probably the creepiest villain ever. Like, oh my gosh, I hated him, but I like, every time he was in a scene, I just got chills, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, what's gonna happen? Like, I don't know, I was just so just creeped out by him. Like, I don't think I've ever been so convinced and creeped out by a villain in a book. So yeah, so I would definitely recommend reading Shadow of the Wind if you like that kind of situation. It was really good. I gave it an overall rating of 4 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I've heard a lot of people talk about this book and recommend it, and some of my favorite booktubers have really liked it and really like Alice Oseman's writing in general. So I decided I wanted to check it out. I actually have had it on hold at my library for months, and it finally came off hold. So I was like, yes, I can finally read it. So I read it, and I did not like it. Hot take. I gave it a rating of 2.5 stars, which is actually the lowest rating I've given on a book since I started this channel. And I don't want to say it was a bad book, because, you know, there were some elements to it that I did enjoy and did like. But overall, I think I've realized that I'm just not really a fan of the whole contemporary YA genre, and specifically, I'm not really a fan of Alice Oseman's writing style and just the way that she writes. I just didn't love it. And the main character, her name is Frances. She's a teenage girl who's top of her class in all of her classes, and she wants to get into Cambridge, and that's like her whole goal in life. And her identity is based around her grades. And she is this very, very insecure teenage girl who is like basically afraid to show her quirky side to other people because she's afraid that she'll be judged. And I just wasn't convinced. I didn't like her very much as a main character, and I didn't like her narration, and I think that was probably why I didn't enjoy the book very much, because Frances was just so whiny, and she was always just talking about how insecure she was and how horrible she felt about her life. And like, I don't know, I got kind of fed up with it. I honestly did. Like, and I feel bad because I know people do struggle with things like that, and I know that a lot of people related to this book a lot, which is why so many people like it. I didn't like it. I didn't relate to Frances very much, and just the whole like way that the book was written, it was very slingy, very, very teenager-ish. Like, it was just super, like, the writing style was just not my type of writing style. I just didn't really enjoy it. Just a lot of that, like, sarcastic teenage angst that is super popular in those types of books, and I just am really not about it. Because I'm kind of insensitive saying that, because I do know that, like, Frances was depressed and everything, and she had, like, depression, and she was struggling, and I'm not trying to invalidate anyone who has that experience, because I've had that experience, and I think everyone has, but I just wasn't a huge fan of just the bleak outlook, I guess. And things I did like about the book, though, I thought the friendship between Frances and Aled, the two main characters, was really sweet. Sort of like a platonic soulmates situation. Like, they were, like, it was like they loved each other so much, but in a platonic way. And I thought that was really sweet, because you don't see that in books very often. I thought the parts that were like their texting conversations were really cute, just because I was like, oh, I can totally see two teenagers talking to each other like this. But there was also just like a lot of weird elements to this book. Like, for example, the scene where Frances gets like told that she can't be head girl anymore, because she's like head girl at her school or whatever. And she's told that she can't be head girl anymore because she supports the show Radio Silence, which is what the whole book is like centered around, as her best friend does this show. And she's like a fan of the show, and then she does art for the show. And so when she gets like publicly associated with the show, she gets her head girl position taken away. And the reason is because there's like, it's like a liberal show, and it talks about like the education system being corrupt. And I was just like, is that realistic? Like, would someone at a school actually do that because of a kid's show on YouTube? Like, I just thought it was so a little bit too hard-hitting, I guess, because I was like, I don't know, maybe that is realistic in, like, I don't know much about like the English education system or like those more like elite schools that Frances is attending, but I was just like, are schools actually censoring students like that? Like, I didn't know that was a thing. It just didn't seem very realistic to me that would actually happen. And just like, yeah, I don't know. And I'm all for like the education system being like, you know, people criticizing the education system, because I am definitely a big criticizer of the education system. But I just thought that whole thing was really weird, and like just some of I don't know. Anyway, I've rambled about this for a long time, but I guess it just didn't impact me in the way that I think it's impacted others. So for that reason, I just rated it lower. The next two books that I read were the last two books in the Mortal Instrument series. I read City of Lost Souls and City of Heavenly Fire. City of Lost Souls was probably my least favorite of the entire series, actually. I rated it 3.5 stars because I still did think it was good and I enjoyed it, but it was definitely like, I don't know what it was. I think it was just City of Lost Souls out of the entire series, including the last book, which I actually have right here. I just barely finished it. It was the darkest book out of the whole series by a lot. Like, because there's that whole storyline. This is kind of a spoiler if you haven't read, just skip ahead. But there's that whole storyline about like Jace and Sebastian's like life forces getting entwined, and so they're in a way they're like the same person. Like Jace was almost like an extension of Sebastian and vice versa. Well, really more. Jace was being kind of controlled by him. And then Clare goes to like visit them, or she goes to like try and save Jace and try and find out information about what's going on with Jace, but she gets trapped in this like other dimension place with Jace and Sebastian, and a lot of the stuff that happens is really dark and like, made me like uncomfortable. I was like, oh my gosh, like her brother is evil for one thing. Sebastian as a villain, I did find him a lot more convincing than I found Valentine. Valentine was just kind of a corny, like, oh, I want to purge the world of I want to purge the world of everything but Shadowhunters, like sort of cliche type villain. But Sebastian was just sort of like an evil psychopath, and I'm a lot more convinced by those kinds of villains who are like evil psychopaths and just kind of want to watch the world burn than villains who are like convicted that what they're doing is right, because I just think that, I mean, sometimes it can be convincing, but I think that a lot of the time those types of villains are just very like cliched. I don't know. So I definitely thought Sebastian was a lot more of like a scary villain. Like I was more scared of him than I was of Valentine. Especially just like how he was with Clary. Like, also, if you do read this book, there's definitely like sexual assault trigger for this one. Not anything like super graphic, but definitely does touch on that. And that was also very dark. So I was just like, wow, this book is, yikes, a little bit more than I bargained for, I guess. But overall though, it was good. There was a lot of good like moments in there, and I liked all the other characters' development a lot. Like the side characters in this series are like my favorite. I love Simon and Isabel, Alec and Magnus. Like they're my favorite. I love all of them. I'm more invested in them at certain points than I was with like Clary and Jace's relationship and storyline. So, and then I just barely finished this one, City of Heavenly Fire. This is the only physical book I have with me because all these books I checked out from the library or listened to on audio or read on Kindle, so I don't actually have physical copies of any of them. But this one I gave a rating of 4 stars. I did enjoy this last book. I definitely think that it was kind of, I don't know, for some reason I found myself less compelled to pick this one up. This was the one, and maybe it's just because it's the last book and I was just trying to get to the end, but I definitely felt myself less like, oh my gosh, I want to read it right now. It was more of like, I'll read it later. So I think there were just parts that were a little bit slow, but there was a lot that had to happen in this book to wrap everything up, and a lot went down, and I do feel like it was described, it was well, and it was done well. The suspension or the ending was good. I feel like Cassandra Clare always pulls off really good endings for her books, and also the ending of this one, the way that she wrapped up the entire series was really sweet and cute, and I really liked it. And I liked that the characters are happy because I love them. So yeah. And then real quick, I'm just going to mention this one. It's Collected Poems of Sylvia Plath. I read a lot of this book, not all of it from like cover to cover, but I read a lot of it this month, and I loved her poems. I definitely give this 5 stars. I'm obsessed with Sylvia Plath's poetry, like so obsessed. Like I want to read more today actually, because I just love her writing. I just feel like she is so, her poems, like I love this about them. I have to read them multiple times to understand them. I have to like, it's almost like a puzzle that I'm putting together. And then once I understand it, it like clicks into place and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is genius. Like there are just so many poems in here. There's actually one that I want to memorize because I love it so much. And it's called, let me see if I can find it. Epitaph for Fire and Flower. This one, oh my Lanta, I read it and I was like, this poem, I have to memorize it. This is my May wrap up. Hopefully you enjoyed. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these or if you want to read any of them. I actually feel like my reading month was overall pretty good. I did like most of the books that I read. But next month in June, I'm planning to have a much more productive and much more like diverse reading month. So I will probably be doing a June TBR video that will be coming out in a couple of days because I want to kind of chat with you guys about what I want to read. So thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you feel like it. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.